Hello everyone, I hope you've been well, and today we're going to go through my Blaidd costume from Elden Ring. As I've mentioned before, Elden Ring kind of consumed my life, especially all of the lore, and I knew that I would definitely be cosplaying from it. I've done a few so far. Marika I've actually done twice, and then I've also done Melina and then a test of Mikola. And I knew I wanted to tackle some kind of armour build from Elden Ring. I kind of went back and forth a few times. When I first got into Elden Ring, I quite liked Malekith. I thought his story was really interesting, but after getting more into Rani's storyline and meeting Blaidd, and I guess understanding like the tragic ending of Blaidd, how he was so intent on, helping Rani and her cause, but it drove him to madness because he had these two conflicting things. The fingers basically saying, nope, she's gone off the path, take her down, but also that kind of loyalty as well. I love his aesthetic as well, especially his sword, who doesn't? And I knew it would be a build that I was kind of comfortable making, but it had enough challenges as well, which made it really interesting, and so I decided to make it for kind of the larger convention here in Adelaide, and I wore it there as well, which was beyond amazing. It honestly wore me out. I haven't worn full armour like that all day in a long time, but just the response was amazing. So many Elden Ring fans. And then I also did a really fantastic photo shoot of this costume. I was quite nervous putting it all together because I don't know, with things like this where there's so many moving parts, I always worry that things are going to fall off or the pictures are going to be a bit funny looking, but that also turned out amazing and I had so much fun, especially shooting it in a forest. I kind of felt like I was in Elden Ring, so that was really amazing. Now today I'm actually going to kind of do a bit of a breakdown of the entire costume, talk a lot about the armour, maybe some problems I ran into and the solutions I had, because if you're making a Blaidd costume it's very useful, but even if you aren't, I feel like because armour, especially in terms of like attachments or patterning or figuring out how to really take this, game or animate armour and then turning it into something you can wear in real life is always a bit challenging. So even if it's just for a different costume, hopefully you'll find some tips that you can use as well. Now jumping right into it, like with every costume, especially larger builds, I essentially do a bit of it's almost like a bit of a mind map. Like I have the photo reference of the character and then I basically just start drawing. I do this on my iPad now. I start drawing all of these different, whether it's like mock-up templates for the armour or just different ideas as well, being like, hey, these are the things I need to purchase. Now starting out with kind of the base stuff and then I'll move on to the armour and then the accessories. For the costume, because I was doing a femme version, I kind of took some inspiration from other Blaidd costumes, but then I also just added my own little flair to it as well, like I usually do. So for the base, I started off with some thrifted leggings and then also a tank top as well. These are just standard black clothing items. They were quite fitted, so it meant I could put the armour on comfortably. And then along with that as well, I had some black gloves here. They look a bit funny when they're not on. Basically, I chose not to do long sleeves because I was a little bit concerned about getting too hot. You could certainly do that, but I went for like tank top and gloves instead, just because I knew the cloak would be really heavy. I'm not quite as good at staying in a really heavy costume for super long periods as I maybe was when I was a teenager. My body just unfortunately can't quite handle that, so I generally have to go in and maybe make a few kind of changes just so it is a bit more comfortable or that I don't overheat or anything like that. And then what I did is he's got these belts. Fun fact, these belt buckles are actually from maybe like the second or third cosplay I ever did, which was my Alice Madness Returns. I basically got them, repainted them, and then tacked them onto the gloves. It just meant that they weren't gonna like kind of shift around too much. One thing you'll notice throughout this costume is that, I kind of, with big armour, especially wearing it to a convention, the thought of adjusting all day kind of I've been there and it's not so fun. So if I can like tack down anything or pin anything throughout the day, I'm going to do it. I also had some boots and some kind of leg wraps as well. Excuse the state of these. They're a little bit muddy because I actually wore them for a Senua costume recently. But I just thrifted these guys. They're not really in great condition, but that kind of suits. It is peeling away a little bit at the kind of fake fabric here, but the wraps cover it, and like, I don't know, they were just the right length and kind of colour as well. So that was a really good thrift find as well, and they're relatively comfortable. I did end up adding just some of those like kind of foam insoles just to make it a little bit more comfy so I could wear them all day. Now these were the wraps I made as well. I bought some of this kind of suede brown fabric, sewed them together and kind of just lined them to make them a bit thicker. Again, added a little bit of weathering and then a little bit of puff paint too. You'll notice that I went kind of crazy with puff paint. I saw this idea online for a completely different costume, and it's something I hadn't used before, but it worked really well for this outfit. So yes, puff paint, if you haven't looked into it and you're an Armour cosplayer, look into it. These basically just velcroed. I really like velcro. I think it's really handy. It's not, I just kind of get the cheaper velcro, so it's not the most sturdy. So if it's something that's kind of pulling constantly, then I'll go for snaps, but around the legs these were perfect. They just kind of velcroed, and then the knee parts just kind of tied around the edge as well. And then there was also this little bit which went around the bottom of the boot. I just had again, a little bit more puff paint and weathering. These actually have a bit of mud on them from the photo shoot. And then there's a bit of elastic, and then again a little bit more velcro too. Now for the lovely cape or the cloak, whatever you want to call it. Oh, this big fluffy guy here. It's gonna be hard to get in frame there. Basically what I did is I got this faux fur online. I actually struggled a bit with this. The local store I went to, I wasn't super happy with what they had, and so I ended up buying this online. It was a little bit too white, so I actually went in and spray painted it, and then you just kind of brush it out a little bit so it doesn't look too like clumped together. And this turned out really well. I really love the kind of different colour, and obviously like you can see on camera here, like it just really looks lovely in photographs and video. I went for quite a jagged look as well. Like I really wanted to add all of these different kind of layers, and just so when I walked around it was kind of floofy. And then on the inside I just used some navy fabric I already had. I actually had to kind of patchwork it together because I didn't have a lot, but you know, again, where I can thrift or use in my hoard, I will. But the benefit of doing that is that it kind of looks like it has just been patched together, which I think does actually suit Blaidd's cloak, so I really liked the effect of that. When I get to the chest piece, I'll show you how this properly attaches, but essentially with larger cloaks, and if I am wearing a chest plate, I always do little buckles so they just clip on and then they're nice and comfy. Sometimes with cloaks though is that like these little bits that are kind of meant to sit like that pull back. So again, just a little bit of Velcro, and I have the Velcro on the breastplate, and that just clicks down as well so it stays in place. I also have this, which was originally part of my Aloy costume, and we love recycling. I needed just one more piece to kind of go around the shoulders and clip in at the front, just to kind of bring it all together, and this was perfect. I also have a little charm on here, which kind of isn't exactly what he has, but I wanted again to reuse this. I thought it was quite nice, and then I just painted it, and I don't know, I just wanted something a bit extra, so I did actually add some lights behind it as well. I don't know, I just thought this was a cute little reference to Rani's power, and yeah, it's a cute little thing there. And then the last thing that kind of sandwiches between both that layer and the cloak itself is this little bit here, which looks really strange when it's not actually on. Again, velcroing at the front there. This, because Blaidd's cloak, you can kind of see the fur is kind of loosely attached to almost the fabric, and like it's almost growing out of it, and so I wanted again to kind of add that a little bit here, so I just used some fabric and then some of that scrapped fur, and then just glued it on there. So basically when you have this and then you have the other piece on top, kind of blends quite nicely with the rest of the cloak. Alrighty, now we're going to kind of start tackling some of the armor pieces. First is the kind of hip piece he's wearing, and that is this one here. Now for pretty much all of the armour I use foam. I use a bit of a mix. Sometimes I'll get the rolls from Lumen's Workshop, and so like for the chest plate I used that, but otherwise I just get really cheap craft foam from like a local craft store. So you can kind of see at the back of this all the different colours, but you didn't see the back, so it was fine. And then I just prime pretty much all of it with Plastidip. I know there's lots of different, I guess, primers you can use. You know, wood glue is a really cheap alternative. Flexibond is a really good one too. The reason I chose Plastidip is I was on a bit of a time crunch, and I just didn't have as much time as I wanted to really dedicate to this project, so it meant that where I had to kind of take some shortcuts I did. I really like Plastidip, but it is a bit more of an expensive way to do it, and then you don't quite have quite as much control because obviously you're spraying and not painting on. But for this project it worked really well, especially because I did use a lot of puff paint as well. So the details here are done with the puff paint. I just got some really cheap stuff from the one of just the local stores here, and I still have heaps left, which is fantastic. It's a little bit fiddly to use, like you'll see some of my lines aren't the sharpest. There are ways to do that, but I honestly didn't really mind that much. As long as it looked like okay in photos, I was happy. And so then but the process I did is I would pattern out, so I just patterned out these little guys. I would then cut it from foam, then I would probably stick it together like I did with this one, just using hot glue, and then I had some ribbon on the back just to make it a bit more like flexible. Then I would go in and puff paint it, Plastidip it, and then paint it. I used a lot of silver rub and buff, as well as some paint like markers. They had like, I just bought some online, some white, some silver and gold. Then I was able to kind of, again, give it some kind of nice details as well. Highlighted some bits, just so again it kind of makes it look a bit more three-dimensional. Again, this just closes with some Velcro at the back. This fur is just something I had lying around, which just kind of suited the colour, had a little bit of that. I added a bit of chain here as well. Like I said, I kind of love adding just a few accessories if I can help it. And so that was that piece. Okay, now onto the bulk of the armour. We'll start with Mr. Chess piece here, which is a little bit ridiculous. The pattern for this was Pretzel Cosplay's pattern. Generally before this I usually do my own patterns, and everything else here I did, but this one, it was just kind of an experiment. I wanted to try using a new one. It worked out okay. I feel like this was probably a little bit big for me in sections, so I had to definitely splice it up a bit after I put it together, but that's always going to happen if you use other people's pre-made costumes, because everybody's body shape is different. So I don't know if I'd do it again, but I still got there in the end and I was quite happy with this. Again, kind of a similar process. I made the breastplate and then I added all of these extra details that you can see that he has. Obviously I had to make it a female version, and so I kind of had to just work with the proportions that I have. You know, I'm not a like 7 foot huge wolf man, so I had to kind of adjust things, but I always find that really fun, like trying to get it to still look really epic but suit the body that I have. And then one of the important things to me is that I'm able to put on the costumes by myself, just because usually when I am getting ready, usually it's just me getting everything to go. So the way I did it is that I had Velcro on the side, so I'd basically put this over my head and then Velcro the sides up, and it was just like a really easy way. Initially I was going to do it through the back, but I'm not flexible at all, so I would not be able to reach and lace myself up, so this was kind of the way I went about it. Again, just using Velcro. There's a bit of Velcro here, which is where the hips attach, and I'll show those in a tick. Again, completely covered in lots of puff paint this time. And then with painting all of the armour, I pretty much used rub and buff silver for most of it, and then with all the details, basically what I like to do is for the darker details here I go in with black paint, and then to kind of, I ended up outlining most of the puff paint with it's just like a permanent black marker, and this is one of my favourite tips. Like, you have so much control. The only thing is that on the silver rub and buff it doesn't show up perfectly, but in this case it worked for me because I didn't want it to be like a huge dark outline, but just a little bit to show the details. And then I did weather a little bit around the chest area as well. I did actually go in and add a bit of damage to the armour. I did it with like a meat pounder just because, I don't know, I needed something to hit the foam and it worked, just to make it look a bit more battle worn as well. All of these extra foam details I've added like around here is just like the cheap thin foam. But yeah, I'm really pleased. I did the back as well, even though you can't see it with the cloak. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how this turned out because it's foam, because everything's kind of nice and flexible. I can just put it over my head, I can bend and stuff. I mean, it's not easy, but it's not gonna like hurt the armour at all. So yeah, that's very cool. Next were the hip pieces. These were quite simple. They just kind of velcro onto the chest plate. I added some buckles, and this leather I had is just stuff I already had from a different costume. The little silver rivets, and they're gonna pop up as well. They literally are just the little butterfly clips that you use in stationery. This is like, I used this heaps for my Kratos costume and I just loved it so much that, I don't know, it's a really great way to add details. It's a nice silver, and it's a good thing to put like if you're holding pieces together as well. Similar to the chest piece, I just kind of added a few layers and then went in with some puff paint, and then did that rub and buff, added some weathering to it. This is another really textured piece that I think turned out really cool, and it kind of does look like armour, even though it's a little bit fluffy, but it does look like steel armour. Next were the braces. So these just go over the gloves that I have. Again, these just close up with Velcro as well. What I did at the other end is, again, just for movement wise, because I was quite cautious about being able to take them on and off and everything, I've just got a little bit of elastic, just so I can kind of tighten it and get it to go, get it to sit nicely. With these, I basically went in with a bunch of different layers of foam stuck together. I just think this gave such a great effect. And then once I darkened and highlighted everything, and with some of the kind of swirly tips, I went in with a little bit of the white paint texture. Again, it just really adds that three-dimensional look, and yeah, these also turned out really well. For the gloves, I bought some fingerless gloves online and then attached the little armour to them. Now, this is something I always do. I really don't like wearing full gloves if I can help it at all. And so, especially with claws, because when I actually wear them, you can't super tell they're fingerless. But it just means that if I need to use my phone or like just for dexterity, I just much prefer to do fingerless for all my armour, especially because most of them do have like claws or something or other. Basically, I just, again, made these from foam and then directly hot glued them onto the gloves themselves. I did end up putting some little like bits of elastic, just to make sure that when my fingers would bend, the claws would bend as well, because when I didn't, they did stick out a little bit and look a bit awkward. And then ta-da! I'll do the shoulders next. Again, very similar to everything else. I just patterned it from paper, doing it on a mannequin and then trying it on myself, and then cut it from foam. I really like how these look. Again, I kind of went for that layered foam look, again using a bunch of these little butterfly clips because it just kind of allowed for just enough movement that it wouldn't stay on me, but you know, wasn't too kind of stiff or awkward when I'm posed. The way these attach again is using some of the Velcro which attached to the breastplate. Originally I tried to glue this directly to the breastplate, but I actually couldn't get my arms in properly. I did end up adding a bit of elastic as well, just so that basically if I'm wearing it and I move up or down, again, it's going to move with me. I think that's a pretty important part of armour, getting it to look really natural, is kind of adding just these little adjustments here or attachments so that when you do move, everything stays in place. Okay, the last bit of armour is the kind of knee leg armour, which was probably the hardest bit for me. I'm not gonna lie, I don't love knee armour. If I can help it, I'll try to avoid it just because it's such a pain to kind of pattern, and then wearing it if you're kind of sitting down, it's hard to anyway, it's not my favourite thing to make, so I think this was the only thing I was not super keen to do for Blaidd. The way I kind of tackled it is I basically kind of split it into two. and kind of made 2 different sections, counted how many different sections of the knee part Blaidd had, and then adjusted it to suit, again, my own proportions. So what I ended up doing was having basically 4 different layers of foam here, and then 3 different foam layers here. Wasn't quite sure how I was going to go about this, but what I ended up doing was splitting it in 2, having kind of that section around my knee, and then that would kind of tuck in there, and then when I moved, and this actually turned out okay, like I was, the photo shoot initially I was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna break when I bend, or it's gonna do something, but that's the great thing about Plastidip and Rub and Buff, is that like these have been through the ringer and they still look reasonably well, which is really cool. So basically there's elastic on the back of this that would go around my legs, and then I would actually go in and pin the elastic in place. I have these little black safety pins, you don't notice them at all. Again, if I can pin anything to make my life easier, I will. I did this because I did not want them to slide down during the shoot, and I wanted them to, they did kind of need to stay in place, because if I was like sitting down or bending down, you know, I wanted to make sure that like this wouldn't shift up like that and there would be a gap. I really did want it to seem like one seamless piece like Blaidd has. Again, using all of those little butterfly clips gave it just enough flexibility that it held its place, and I did go in and hot glue a little bit here, mind you, but it gave it just enough just enough, you can kind of see it here, just enough flexibility, and then I went in and darkened parts of it, so if it did shift it didn't look too bad, but just enough flexibility that it was comfortable and looked good, but I could still move. So I had 4 in total of these guys, and the last thing I did as well is that, again, this was just a last minute attachment, because basically when it hugged against my thigh, I did notice when I bent the edges kind of like popped out a bit. So I did end up adding a little bit of black cord. It didn't stand out too much, which was good, but it just meant that it kind of pulled it closer again, making it just a squidge more natural. Okay, that is the pile of armour done. Next up to some of the accessories. Now for the wig. I ended up just getting a cheap kind of black and grey wig online. Obviously he's got a wolf's head, half wolf's head. I think looking back it would have been really cool to do a like almost like a wolf headdress, but again, just because of time I didn't quite doing that, so I did the classic ears instead. And so I just kind of added a few different braids, more of that like warrior Viking look to it as well, and then I always like tying back part of it as well, so I'm not having to, you know, brush a fringe out of my face, but I think this turned out really cool. I really love the colours of it. And then, as I mentioned, I had some little wolf ears as well. I saw that Jessica Negri had done it with the ears, and I was like, oh, that's such a cute idea. So that's kind of, this was my low budget one, because these were actually my Luna ears, and I just repurposed them, again, because I was a little bit more cautious about time, and I just didn't have as long as I usually do to work on these types of costumes. This was a great alternative, and these were super cute as well. They blended really nicely with the wig. Another little nod I added, which it's a bit silly, but you know, I wanted, again, another silver chain. I actually put a little ring that I have. It kind of looks like Rani's ring that you give her at the end of the Age of Stars. So that was just like a cute little nod. It was kind of fun sharing that with people. And then for the makeup as well, I did go in and kind of create like a darker look. I did add some scars as well. I felt like it needed that to really suit the rest of the costume. And then the last piece of this wonderful costume, of course, is the happy little greatsword, which doesn't even remotely fit in frame, but this little guy here, well, not little, this big guy here. This was a bit of a journey. Because I was really determined to use mostly what I already had at home, it's really hodgepodge together, I'm not gonna lie. So I do have a kind of a dowel going all the way through it, acting as the support so I can hold it up, and then the rest of it is foam. And then there is a cardboard cylinder at the end here as well, that kind of makes up the handle of the sword. Basically the process I did was pattern it out, again to kind of suit my proportions and my size. I then cut out the foam. I did a couple different layers. Ideally you would just kind of get maybe 2 layers of thicker foam, but I kind of had to hodgepodge it together. Cut out the center so I could put the dowel through it, and then I lightly sanded the edges to give it that pointed look, and then it was just a butt ton of details. This stuff at the top here is again thicker foam. This bit is actually hollow, like you can see it's a bit thicker than the rest of the sword, but it's hollow just to keep the weight down. Luckily it's a relatively light sword. It's still, I'm not the strongest person, so it's still a little bit to hold it up with one hand, but at least it's somewhat easy enough to take around. The rest of the details are a mix of foam, so most of this stuff here is foam, and then again lots of puff paint, lots of googly eyes as well for the little gem. For the end here, all of the runes, I just soldered in the details, and then painting was obviously a huge part of this. Gold and silver rub and buff, lots of weathering, so I kind of again outlined everything, highlighted different bits of pieces. I almost took a bit of like WoW Armour inspiration to just really make it look very game-like. So like you can see all the details here with the highlights and the outlining. I don't know, I just feel like it really makes it stand out. The little gems here are actually done with nail polish just to give them a bit more of a shine. These are just things I had in my hoard. And then the end here, these are all strips of thin foam and then a butt ton of puff paint. This looked really funny when it wasn't painted because it was just a million different colours of like foam and like pink puff paint and googly eyes. It was really cursed. And I was like, this is one of those things where like it doesn't really look great until like the last like 5% of it. So as soon as I added all the highlights and shadows, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. But before that I was like, oh my god, have I just wasted a monumental amount of time? And then the last detail of this was just adding a little bit of that kind of, those blood splatters and, you know, and whatnot, having a bit of fun with it. Now on the day of the photo shoot, as I mentioned, we went to a local forest, which was really great. It was a bit more of a sunny day. I've mentioned before that, you know, depending what character you're shooting, the weather can really change the mood of them. So I was a bit unsure about the sun, but we ended up getting some really lovely photos as well. We had a good mix of everything, and I think it really suited the Elden Ring atmosphere. And then, yeah, like I said, wearing this to the convention was so much fun. I really loved this costume, and I'm just happy that it kind of all worked together. I'm sure this won't be my last Elden Ring costume because I just love it so much, but yeah, it was really special being Blaidd. I think he's just such a wonderful character, and I'm really pleased with how everything turned out. As usual, if you have any questions about Armour specifically or about this costume in general, please definitely let me know. I know Armour can be one of those things that can be a little bit intimidating sometimes, but a lot of it is really just trial and error, and you do start to learn little things that you like or don't like, and again, like I was talking about with this costume, if you need to change something to make it more comfortable or to make it suit you better, go ahead and do it. I think that's always the more important thing, is that you're at least somewhat comfortable in costume, and if you can change things to make it a bit of a better experience for you, then go ahead and do it. That's all for today, and I hope you enjoyed learning about Blaidd, and until the next time, bye!